Question 1. Operational review demonstrates that the current process for administering the FADMINAS entrance exam relies heavily on manual data entry for candidate registration and results compilation, with limited backup procedures for system failures. This approach has historically been perceived as cost-effective. However, recent incidents at similar institutions have highlighted the potential for significant data errors and delays in reporting, impacting candidate trust and institutional reputation. Which of the following approaches best addresses the identified risks while aligning with the principles of responsible institutional management? Option A. Invest in a new, advanced software solution immediately without a thorough assessment of integration needs or staff training, aiming for rapid modernization. Option B. Focus solely on improving the speed of manual data entry to expedite results, assuming that any errors will be minor and easily correctable post-publication. Option C. Implement a phased transition to a digital registration and results management system, incorporating robust data validation, automated backups, and a contingency plan for system outages, prioritizing data integrity and operational resilience. Option D. Continue with the manual process, but increase the number of staff overseeing data entry to reduce individual error rates, as this maintains the lowest immediate operational cost. Correct answer is C. Implement a phased transition to a digital registration and results management system, incorporating robust data validation, automated backups, and a contingency plan for system outages, prioritizing data integrity and operational resilience. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term implications of potential risks. The FADMINAS entrance exam context implies a need to assess candidates' understanding of fundamental principles relevant to an educational institution's operations, including risk management. Careful judgment is required to identify and prioritize risks that could impact the institution's reputation, financial stability, and ability to fulfill its educational mission. The correct approach involves a systematic and comprehensive assessment of potential risks, considering their likelihood and impact, and developing appropriate mitigation strategies. This aligns with the principles of good governance and operational management expected within any institution, including educational ones like FADMINAS. While specific regulations for FADMINAS entrance exams might not detail risk assessment methodologies, the underlying ethical and professional responsibility to ensure fair and effective processes necessitates such an approach. This involves identifying potential disruptions, evaluating their severity, and planning for contingencies, thereby safeguarding the integrity of the examination process and the institution's reputation. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost savings without considering the potential for significant disruption or reputational damage fails to uphold the institution's duty of care. This could lead to compromised examination integrity, unfair assessment of candidates, and potential legal or public relations issues. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thoroughness in risk identification and mitigation overlooks the critical need for robust processes. This can result in unforeseen problems that are more costly and difficult to resolve later. A third incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or past practices without a structured risk assessment framework is also professionally unsound. It lacks the systematic analysis required to identify all relevant risks and develop effective controls, leaving the institution vulnerable to unexpected events. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the objectives of the process, in this case, a fair and effective entrance exam. This is followed by identifying potential risks that could hinder achieving these objectives. Each identified risk should then be analyzed for its likelihood and potential impact. Based on this analysis, appropriate mitigation strategies are developed and implemented. Finally, the effectiveness of these strategies should be monitored and reviewed periodically. This structured approach ensures that decisions are informed, risks are managed proactively, and the institution's objectives are met with integrity. Question 2. When evaluating potential sources of information for the FADMINAS entrance exam, which approach best aligns with the principles of academic integrity and regulatory compliance specific to this examination? Option A. Attempting to contact current FADMINAS students or faculty for informal insights into the exam's content. Option B. Consulting only the official FADMINAS entrance exam study guides and publicly available information released by the institution. Option C. Using general knowledge about university entrance exams from other institutions to anticipate FADMINAS questions. Option D. Relying on information shared in unofficial online forums and social media groups discussing the exam. The correct answer is B. Consulting only the official FADMINAS entrance exam study guides and publicly available information released by the institution. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance the immediate need for information with the ethical and regulatory obligations to protect sensitive data. The pressure to provide a quick answer, especially in an academic context like an entrance exam, can lead to shortcuts that violate privacy principles. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any information shared is done so appropriately and with due consideration for the source and its intended use. The correct approach involves recognizing the limitations of publicly available information and the potential for misinterpretation or misuse of data that is not officially sanctioned for public release. It prioritizes adherence to the FADMINAS entrance exams specific guidelines regarding the use of information. This approach is right because it upholds the integrity of the examination process and respects the confidentiality and proprietary nature of internal university data. Relying on official, published materials ensures that the information used is accurate, authorized, and presented in a context that aligns with the exam's objectives, thereby avoiding any breach of academic or data privacy regulations that might be implicitly or explicitly part of the FADMINAS framework. An incorrect approach would be to access or rely on unofficial, potentially leaked, or speculative information. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses established channels for information dissemination and could lead to the use of inaccurate or misleading data. Such actions could violate academic integrity policies, potentially leading to disqualification from the entrance exam. Furthermore, it demonstrates a disregard for the structured and authorized processes that govern academic admissions and information sharing within an institution like FADMINAS. Another incorrect approach would be to infer or guess information based on general knowledge of other university entrance exams. While general knowledge can be helpful, entrance exams are often tailored to specific institutional curricula and objectives. Relying on generalized assumptions without consulting the FADMINAS-specific framework risks providing answers that are not aligned with the exam's actual requirements, thus failing to demonstrate genuine understanding of the FADMINAS context. This approach fails to meet the core requirement of demonstrating knowledge relevant to the specific institution. A third incorrect approach would be to seek direct, unauthorized communication with current students or faculty to obtain insider information about the exam's content or format. This is ethically problematic and professionally unsound, as it constitutes an attempt to gain an unfair advantage and undermines the principle of equal opportunity for all candidates. It also risks misinterpreting information obtained through informal channels and could lead to a violation of FADMINA's academic conduct policies. The professional decision-making process for similar situations involves a clear understanding of the scope of authorized information sources. Professionals should always prioritize official documentation, published guidelines, and authorized communication channels. When in doubt, it is always best to err on the side of caution and seek clarification from the relevant authority rather than proceeding with potentially unauthorized or unreliable information. This systematic approach ensures that actions are compliant, ethical, and contribute to maintaining the integrity of the process. Question 3. Governance review demonstrates a pattern of inconsistent application of admission criteria for undergraduate programs at Adventist colleges of Minas Gerais FADMINAS, potentially impacting academic quality and fairness. Which approach to risk assessment best addresses this situation? Option A. Rely on anecdotal evidence from faculty members about student performance to gauge the severity of the admission inconsistencies. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies potential threats to academic integrity, reputational damage, and regulatory compliance, analyzes the likelihood and impact of each threat, and prioritizes mitigation strategies. Option C. Focus only on the financial implications of potentially admitting underqualified students, ignoring broader concerns about academic standards. Option D. Immediately revise all admission policies to be more stringent, without a detailed analysis of the current inconsistencies or their root causes. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies potential threats to academic integrity, reputational damage, and regulatory compliance, analyzes the likelihood and impact of each threat, and prioritizes mitigation strategies. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the institution's commitment to academic integrity with the practicalities of managing student admissions and potential reputational risks. A thorough risk assessment is crucial to identify potential threats to the FADMINA's reputation and operational stability arising from the governance review findings. The correct approach involves a systematic and comprehensive evaluation of the identified risks. This means not only identifying what could go wrong, but also assessing the likelihood of each risk occurring and the potential impact on FADMINAS. This systematic process allows for the prioritization of risks and the development of targeted mitigation strategies. Such an approach aligns with principles of good governance and institutional management, ensuring that FADMINAS operates in a responsible and sustainable manner, safeguarding its academic standards and public trust. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the findings of the governance review without proper investigation. This failure to acknowledge and address potential issues could lead to unmitigated risks, potentially resulting in significant reputational damage, financial penalties, or even legal challenges if regulatory breaches are discovered. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the most visible or immediate risks, neglecting less obvious but potentially more damaging long-term threats. This selective risk assessment can leave FADMINAS vulnerable to unforeseen problems. Finally, an approach that involves implementing broad, unresearched solutions without a clear understanding of the underlying risks is also flawed. This can lead to wasted resources and ineffective risk management. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the problem or situation, in this case, the findings of the governance review. This is followed by identifying potential risks, analyzing their likelihood and impact, evaluating different response strategies, implementing the chosen strategy, and finally, monitoring and reviewing the effectiveness of the implemented measures. This iterative process ensures that risk management is an ongoing and integral part of institutional operations. Question 4. Analysis of an applicant's situation for admission to FADMINAS, where the candidate presents a strong personal narrative of overcoming significant family challenges that impacted their academic performance in their final year of high school, but their overall academic record, while satisfactory, does not meet the typical threshold for the chosen program. The admissions committee must decide whether to grant admission, considering the applicant's potential and the extenuating circumstances. Which of the following approaches best reflects a responsible and ethical decision-making process within the FADMINA's regulatory framework? Option A. Reject the applicant outright due to their academic record not meeting the standard entry requirements, without further consideration of the personal circumstances. Option B. Grant admission with a clear understanding that the student will need to meet specific academic benchmarks in their first semester to remain enrolled, ensuring a balance between compassion and academic rigor. Option C. Grant admission without any additional conditions, assuming the applicant's resilience will lead to academic success, despite the lower initial academic standing. Option D. Offer admission to a different, less competitive program at FADMINAS that aligns better with the applicant's current academic profile, suggesting a pathway to their desired program later. Correct answer is B. Grant admission with a clear understanding that the student will need to meet specific academic benchmarks in their first semester to remain enrolled, ensuring a balance between compassion and academic rigor. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the need to maintain academic integrity and the pressure to accommodate a student facing personal difficulties. The admissions committee must balance the university's standards with empathy, ensuring that decisions are fair, consistent, and ethically sound, without compromising the quality of the student body. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective assessment of the applicant's academic record and potential, considering the stated extenuating circumstances as a mitigating factor. This aligns with the principles of fairness and due diligence expected in admissions processes. FADMINAS, like any educational institution, is bound by its own internal regulations and ethical guidelines, which likely emphasize merit-based selection while allowing for compassionate consideration of individual situations. A balanced approach ensures that the university upholds its academic standards while demonstrating a commitment to supporting students, provided they meet the core requirements. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to automatically grant admission solely based on the student's personal hardship without a rigorous review of their academic qualifications. This fails to uphold the university's commitment to academic excellence and could set a precedent for compromising standards, potentially violating FADMINA's admission policies. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the applicant's extenuating circumstances entirely and reject them based solely on their academic performance without considering the context. This demonstrates a lack of empathy and could be seen as an ethically unsound decision, potentially contravening any institutional guidelines that encourage holistic review. A third incorrect approach would be to offer admission with significantly lowered academic standards or special conditions that are not applied to other applicants in similar situations. This would undermine the fairness and consistency of the admissions process, potentially violating FADMINA's commitment to equal opportunity and meritocratic selection. Professional reasoning. Professionals in admissions should employ a structured decision-making process. This involves clearly defining the admission criteria, objectively evaluating each applicant against these criteria, and systematically considering any supporting documentation or extenuating circumstances. When personal hardships are presented, the process should involve a review to understand their impact on academic performance, followed by a decision that is consistent with institutional policies and ethical principles of fairness and equity. Documentation of the decision-making process is crucial for accountability. Question 5. Quality control measures reveal a pattern of lower than expected student performance in several core subjects across multiple FADMINA's undergraduate programs. This pattern has been observed over the last 2 academic years. The internal review indicates potential inconsistencies in teaching methodologies and assessment practices among different faculty members and departments. What is the most appropriate initial step for FADMINA's administration to take in addressing this situation? Option A. Immediately implement stricter grading policies and increase the frequency of remedial assessments for all students enrolled in the identified subjects to boost performance. Option B. Issue a directive to all faculty in the affected programs to adhere to a standardized teaching and assessment protocol without further investigation into existing practices. Option C. Initiate a comprehensive review of curriculum design, faculty development programs, and assessment strategies across the affected programs to identify systemic causes for the performance trends. Option D. Focus on communicating the institution's commitment to academic rigor to external stakeholders, emphasizing that the observed trends are isolated incidents and do not reflect broader issues. The correct answer is C. Initiate a comprehensive review of curriculum design, faculty development programs, and assessment strategies across the affected programs to identify systemic causes for the performance trends. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the institution's commitment to academic integrity with the need to address potential systemic issues identified through quality control. The pressure to maintain enrollment numbers and institutional reputation can create a conflict with the rigorous application of academic standards. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any remedial actions are fair, proportionate, and aligned with FADMINA's established academic policies and ethical guidelines. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective investigation into the root causes of the identified quality control issues. This includes analyzing the specific academic programs affected, the nature of the deficiencies, and the potential contributing factors, such as curriculum design, faculty training, or assessment methods. This approach is justified by the FADMINA's regulatory framework, which mandates a commitment to academic excellence and continuous improvement. Ethical principles of fairness and due process require that any identified shortcomings are addressed systematically and transparently, rather than through immediate, punitive measures that could unfairly impact students or faculty. An approach that focuses solely on immediate disciplinary action against students without investigating the underlying systemic causes is incorrect. This fails to address the root of the problem and could lead to an unfair perception of the institution. It violates the principle of proportionality in academic governance and neglects the institution's responsibility to provide a robust educational environment. An approach that prioritizes minimizing negative publicity or financial impact over addressing academic deficiencies is also incorrect. This prioritizes institutional self-interest over the core mission of providing quality education and upholding academic standards. It represents an ethical failure to be transparent and accountable for the quality of education offered. An approach that involves making broad, unsubstantiated accusations against faculty or departments without concrete evidence is professionally unacceptable. This can lead to reputational damage, erosion of trust, and potential legal repercussions, while failing to identify and rectify the actual issues. It contravenes principles of fairness and due process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the identified problem and its potential implications. This involves gathering all relevant information, consulting institutional policies and ethical guidelines, and engaging in objective analysis. The framework should prioritize evidence-based decision-making, fairness, transparency, and a commitment to continuous improvement in academic quality. Question 6. Stakeholder feedback indicates a growing need for enhanced campus infrastructure and updated technological resources at FADMINAS. To address this, the administration is exploring various external funding opportunities. Which of the following approaches to securing these funds best aligns with responsible risk management and the regulatory framework governing Adventist colleges of Minas Gerais FADMINAS? Option A. Prioritize securing funding from any source that can provide the quickest and largest financial injection, regardless of the source's background or potential implications. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment for each potential funding source, evaluating their alignment with FADMINA's mission, ethical standards, and compliance with Brazilian educational regulations before committing to any agreement. Option C. Focus exclusively on funding opportunities that offer the highest potential return on investment, without significant consideration for the donor's reputation or the nature of the funds. Option D. Accept funding offers primarily based on the perceived prestige or influence of the potential donor, assuming their involvement inherently validates the funding source. The correct answer is A. Prioritize securing funding from any source that can provide the quickest and largest financial injection, regardless of the source's background or potential implications. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for financial resources with the long-term ethical and regulatory obligations of an educational institution. The pressure to secure funding can lead to overlooking potential risks or engaging in practices that, while seemingly beneficial in the short term, could compromise the institution's integrity and reputation. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all funding sources align with FADMINA's mission and regulatory compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough risk assessment of potential funding sources, prioritizing those that align with FADMINA's mission and ethical standards, and ensuring compliance with all relevant Brazilian educational regulations. This approach is right because it proactively identifies and mitigates potential financial, reputational, and regulatory risks associated with external funding. It demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to responsible financial management, which are implicitly expected of educational institutions operating under Brazilian law and the specific guidelines governing private colleges. This aligns with the principles of good governance and fiduciary responsibility. Incorrect approaches analysis. Pursuing funding from any source that offers immediate financial benefit without due diligence fails to adhere to the principle of responsible financial stewardship and regulatory compliance. This approach risks accepting funds with strings attached that could compromise academic freedom or institutional autonomy, potentially violating ethical guidelines for educational institutions in Brazil. Accepting funding solely based on the perceived prestige of the donor, without assessing the donor's ethical standing or the potential reputational risks, is also an inadequate approach. This could lead to association with entities that engage in unethical practices, thereby damaging FADMINA's reputation and potentially contravening implicit ethical expectations for educational bodies. Focusing only on the financial return on investment for any potential funding, without considering the alignment with FADMINA's educational mission and values, is a narrow and potentially harmful strategy. This can lead to decisions that prioritize profit over educational quality or ethical considerations, which is contrary to the fundamental purpose of an educational institution and could lead to regulatory scrutiny if it impacts the quality of education provided. Professional reasoning. Professionals in educational administration should adopt a systematic risk assessment framework. This involves identifying potential funding sources, evaluating each source against predefined criteria, including financial viability, ethical alignment, reputational impact, and regulatory compliance, and developing mitigation strategies for identified risks. Decision-making should be guided by a commitment to the institution's mission, ethical principles, and all applicable Brazilian laws and regulations governing higher education. Question 7. Research into the financial sustainability of FADMINA's admission strategy reveals a potential mismatch between the average income of prospective students in the region and the proposed tuition fees for upcoming academic years. Which risk assessment approach best addresses this challenge, while adhering to the principles of responsible institutional management and regulatory compliance? Option A. Increasing marketing efforts to attract a larger volume of applicants, assuming that a higher enrollment will naturally offset any potential financial shortfalls. Option B. Focusing solely on academic merit in admissions, with financial considerations being a secondary concern, and deferring any financial risk assessment to the Finance Department's annual report. Option C. Implementing a tiered tuition fee structure based on demonstrated financial need, coupled with a robust financial literacy program for students and a proactive debt management strategy for the institution. Option D. Maintaining current tuition fees and relying on government subsidies and donor funding to cover any potential revenue gaps, without actively assessing student repayment capabilities. The correct answer is C. Implementing a tiered tuition fee structure based on demonstrated financial need, coupled with a robust financial literacy program for students and a proactive debt management strategy for the institution. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent need to balance the institution's financial stability with its ethical obligations to prospective students and the broader community. FADMINAS, as an educational institution, operates under specific regulatory frameworks that govern its admissions processes and financial management. A robust risk assessment approach is crucial to identify potential threats to the institution's reputation, financial health, and compliance with these regulations. The challenge lies in anticipating and mitigating risks associated with admission policies that could inadvertently lead to financial distress for students or the institution, or create an environment where academic standards are compromised. Correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies, analyzes, and evaluates potential risks related to the admissions process and its financial implications. This includes considering factors such as the affordability of tuition for a significant portion of the applicant pool, the potential for student default on financial obligations, and the institution's capacity to provide quality education within its financial constraints. By proactively assessing these risks, FADMINAS can develop strategies to mitigate them, ensuring both its financial sustainability and its commitment to providing accessible and quality education, aligning with its mission and regulatory requirements. This aligns with principles of sound financial management and institutional responsibility, which are implicitly or explicitly mandated by educational regulatory bodies in Brazil. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing enrollment numbers without considering the financial capacity of students or the institution's ability to deliver on its promises would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to a high student dropout rate due to financial difficulties, negatively impacting student outcomes and the institution's reputation. Furthermore, an approach that neglects to assess the long-term financial viability of admission policies could expose FADMINAS to regulatory scrutiny for unsustainable practices. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore potential risks altogether, operating under the assumption that all students will meet their financial obligations, which is a failure to exercise due diligence and a disregard for potential financial and ethical repercussions. Professionals in educational administration should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the institution's mission and values, followed by a thorough identification of all potential risks associated with strategic decisions. This involves consulting relevant regulatory guidelines, engaging stakeholders, and utilizing analytical tools to assess the likelihood and impact of identified risks. Based on this assessment, appropriate mitigation strategies should be developed and implemented, with continuous monitoring and review to adapt to changing circumstances. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, responsible, and aligned with both regulatory compliance and ethical considerations. Question 8. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a potential vulnerability exists in the online submission portal for candidate documentation prior to the FADMINAS entrance exam, specifically concerning the security of personal data. Which of the following approaches best addresses this identified risk? Option A. Implementing enhanced encryption protocols for the submission portal and conducting regular security audits of the system. Option B. Deferring any security enhancements until after the current entrance exam cycle concludes. Option C. Focusing on the aesthetic design of the candidate application form to improve user experience. Option D. Assuming the existing security measures are sufficient due to the historical lack of reported data breaches. The correct answer is A. Implementing enhanced encryption protocols for the submission portal and conducting regular security audits of the system. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in educational institutions, balancing the need for robust risk assessment with the practicalities of implementation and resource allocation. The professional challenge lies in identifying and prioritizing risks that could impact the FADMINAS entrance exam process, ensuring fairness, integrity, and compliance with relevant regulations, without becoming paralyzed by an exhaustive, unmanageable list. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between significant, actionable risks and minor inconveniences. The correct approach involves a systematic and prioritized assessment of potential risks to the FADMINAS entrance exam. This entails identifying threats to the exam's integrity, e.g., cheating, data breaches, operational disruptions, e.g., technical failures, venue issues, and reputational damage. The process should involve input from relevant stakeholders and lead to the development of mitigation strategies for the most critical risks. This aligns with the principles of good governance and operational excellence expected of an academic institution, ensuring the credibility of the entrance process and adherence to any implicit or explicit guidelines governing such examinations within the Brazilian educational context. While specific FADMINAS internal regulations are not provided, the general expectation for any accredited educational institution is to maintain a secure and fair examination process. An approach that focuses solely on minor logistical issues, such as the color of pens, fails to address the core risks that could compromise the exam's validity or the institution's reputation. This overlooks significant threats like potential security breaches or systemic biases, which are far more detrimental. An approach that delays risk assessment until after the exam has concluded is fundamentally flawed. Risk assessment is a proactive process designed to prevent problems, not to analyze them retrospectively. This failure to anticipate and mitigate risks before they materialize can lead to irreversible damage to the exam's integrity and the institution's standing. An approach that ignores potential risks due to a belief that the exam has always been conducted without issues is complacent and negligent. Past success does not guarantee future security or operational stability. This mindset prevents necessary adaptation to evolving threats and technological advancements, leaving the institution vulnerable. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the objectives of the FADMINAS entrance exam. This involves identifying potential threats to these objectives, assessing the likelihood and impact of each threat, and then prioritizing them based on their severity. Mitigation strategies should be developed for high-priority risks, and a plan for ongoing monitoring and review should be established. This systematic, forward-looking approach ensures that resources are allocated effectively to protect the integrity and reputation of the examination process. Question 9. Comparative studies suggest that when faced with inquiries about prospective students' application details from individuals outside the official admissions committee, a professional within the Adventist colleges of Minas, Gerais FADMINAS admissions department must navigate a complex ethical and regulatory landscape. Considering the principles of data privacy and institutional integrity, which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Provide general insights into the applicant's academic strengths and weaknesses based on the professional's personal assessment, emphasizing that this is informal feedback. Option B. Attempt to recall and relay any information about the applicant that seems relevant to the inquirer's question, without formally verifying its accuracy or authorization for disclosure. Option C. Share specific scores, personal essays, and any other sensitive application components with the inquirer, explaining that it is to help the applicant understand their standing. Option D. Politely decline to provide any specific details about the applicant, citing FADMINA's commitment to applicant privacy and data protection regulations, and offer to direct the inquirer to general, publicly available information about the admissions process. The correct answer is D. Politely decline to provide any specific details about the applicant, citing FADMINA's commitment to applicant privacy and data protection regulations, and offer to direct the inquirer to general, publicly available information about the admissions process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the immediate need for information with the ethical and regulatory obligations to protect sensitive data. The entrance exam process, particularly at an educational institution like Adventist colleges of Minas Gerais FADMINAS, involves handling personal data of applicants, which is subject to specific privacy regulations. The challenge lies in discerning what information is permissible to share and what constitutes a breach of confidentiality or misuse of data, even when the intent might seem benign or helpful. Careful judgment is required to avoid actions that could compromise applicant privacy or violate FADMINA's internal policies and relevant Brazilian data protection laws. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding and application of the principles of data privacy and confidentiality as mandated by Brazilian law, specifically the Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados, LGPD, and FADMINA's own internal guidelines for handling applicant information. This approach prioritizes the protection of personal data, ensuring that only information that is publicly available or explicitly authorized for disclosure is shared. It requires the professional to recognize the boundaries of their access and responsibility, seeking guidance from appropriate authorities within FADMINAS if unsure about disclosure protocols. This adheres to the ethical duty of care and the legal requirement to safeguard personal information, preventing unauthorized access or dissemination. An incorrect approach that involves sharing specific, non-public details about applicant performance or personal circumstances with an unauthorized third party, even if framed as informal advice, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action directly violates the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation under LGPD, as the data was collected for admission purposes, not for informal consultation with external individuals. It also breaches the duty of confidentiality owed to applicants. Another incorrect approach, such as fabricating or guessing information to satisfy a request, is unethical and undermines the integrity of the admission process. It can lead to misrepresentation and unfair advantages or disadvantages, violating principles of fairness and transparency. A third incorrect approach, which is to ignore the request entirely without any communication, might seem safe but can be professionally detrimental, potentially leading to misunderstandings or a perception of unresponsiveness, though it is less severe than a data breach. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear framework. First, identify the nature of the request and the type of information being sought. Second, consult relevant internal policies and external regulations, like LGPD, to determine the permissibility of disclosure. Third, if there is any doubt, err on the side of caution and seek clarification from supervisors or the designated data protection officer within FADMINAS. Fourth, communicate clearly and professionally with the requester, explaining any limitations on information sharing based on privacy and confidentiality rules. Question 10. Compliance review shows that a candidate for the FADMINAS entrance exam, while demonstrating significant extracurricular achievements and potential for future community engagement, falls slightly below the minimum academic score required by the FADMINAS entrance exam's published admission criteria. The admissions committee is considering admitting the candidate based on their perceived potential. Which approach best aligns with the regulatory framework and ethical considerations for the FADMINAS entrance exam? Option A. Focus the assessment solely on the candidate's potential for future success and community impact, deeming the minimum academic score less critical in this specific instance. Option B. Conduct a detailed risk assessment of the candidate's application, evaluating their current academic standing against all FADMINAS entrance exam admission requirements, and document any decision-making process, including any permissible exceptions or alternative pathways as per FADMINAS guidelines. Option C. Admit the candidate immediately based on their strong extracurricular profile and potential future contribution, as this aligns with FADMINA's broader mission of developing well-rounded individuals. Option D. Bypass the standard admission review process and seek direct approval from a senior FADMINAS administrator to admit the candidate, citing their unique potential. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed risk assessment of the candidate's application, evaluating their current academic standing against all FADMINAS entrance exam admission requirements, and document any decision-making process, including any permissible exceptions or alternative pathways as per FADMINA's guidelines. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the need to maintain academic integrity and the pressure to admit a candidate who may not fully meet the established criteria. The FADMINA's entrance exam regulations, as a guiding framework, emphasize fairness, transparency, and adherence to established academic standards. A risk assessment approach is crucial here to systematically identify, analyze, and mitigate potential negative outcomes that could compromise the institution's reputation and the validity of its admissions process. The correct approach involves a thorough and documented assessment of the candidate's profile against the FADMINA's entrance exam's established admission criteria, considering any permissible exceptions or alternative pathways outlined in the FADMINA's regulatory framework. This approach prioritizes objective evaluation and adherence to institutional policy, ensuring that any decision is justifiable and defensible. It aligns with the ethical obligation to uphold academic standards and treat all applicants equitably, preventing undue influence or favoritism. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the candidate's potential future contributions without a rigorous evaluation of current academic merit would be professionally unacceptable. This fails to adhere to the FADMINA's entrance exam's stated admission requirements and could be perceived as a deviation from fair selection processes, potentially undermining the credibility of the institution. Another incorrect approach that involves bypassing the established risk assessment protocols and making an immediate decision based on personal discretion, without consulting relevant FADMINA's admission guidelines or seeking appropriate approvals, represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This lack of due process and documentation can lead to inconsistent decision-making and expose the institution to scrutiny. A third incorrect approach that involves seeking external pressure or influence to override the standard admission procedures is also professionally unacceptable. This undermines the autonomy of the admissions committee and the integrity of the FADMINA's entrance exam process, potentially creating a precedent for future undue influence. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding and strictly adhering to the FADMINA's entrance exam's regulatory framework and admission policies. 2. Conducting a comprehensive and documented risk assessment of the candidate's application, identifying potential risks and their impact. 3. Evaluating the candidate's qualifications objectively against all established criteria, including any provisions for exceptional circumstances. 4. Consulting with relevant FADMINAS stakeholders, such as the admissions committee or academic leadership, when significant deviations or complex judgments are required. 5. Ensuring all decisions are transparent, justifiable, and well documented to maintain accountability and uphold institutional integrity. Question 11. Regulatory review indicates that Adventist colleges of Minas Gerais FADMINAS must implement a robust risk assessment framework. Considering the institution's mission and the specific regulatory environment of higher education in Minas Gerais, which of the following approaches best aligns with best practices for identifying and mitigating potential risks to academic quality, financial sustainability, and operational integrity? Option A. Focusing the risk assessment exclusively on financial and compliance risks, neglecting potential reputational or operational risks that could impact FADMINA's unique identity and mission. Option B. Relying primarily on historical incident data to identify risks, assuming that past patterns will accurately predict future challenges without significant adaptation. Option C. Conducting a comprehensive, forward-looking risk assessment that integrates FADMINA's mission and values with regulatory requirements, focusing on proactive identification and mitigation of diverse risks across all institutional functions. Option D. Prioritizing risk mitigation strategies based solely on the lowest immediate cost, even if this means accepting a higher residual risk in critical operational or academic areas. The correct answer is C. Conducting a comprehensive, forward-looking risk assessment that integrates FADMINA's mission and values with regulatory requirements, focusing on proactive identification and mitigation of diverse risks across all institutional functions. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in educational institutions, balancing the need for robust risk assessment with the practicalities of implementation and the specific ethical and regulatory landscape of Adventist colleges of Minas Gerais FADMINAS. The core professional challenge lies in identifying and mitigating potential risks to the institution's academic integrity, financial stability, and operational continuity, all while adhering to FADMINA's unique mission and values, which may influence risk appetite and mitigation strategies. A superficial or overly bureaucratic approach can stifle innovation and student experience, while an inadequate assessment can lead to significant harm. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, systematic, and forward-looking risk assessment process that is integrated into FADMINA's strategic planning and operational decision-making. This approach prioritizes identifying potential threats and opportunities, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and developing proportionate mitigation strategies. Specifically, it requires understanding the regulatory framework governing higher education in Minas Gerais and Brazil, as well as FADMINA's internal policies and ethical guidelines, which are rooted in Adventist principles. This ensures that risk management is not merely a compliance exercise, but a proactive tool for safeguarding the institution's mission and stakeholders' interests. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on historical data, without considering emerging trends or future uncertainties, fails to adequately prepare FADMINAS for evolving challenges. This overlooks the dynamic nature of the educational sector and potential new risks. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes cost-cutting over thorough risk analysis can lead to undersourcing critical areas, increasing vulnerability to unforeseen events, and potentially violating regulatory requirements for student safety or academic quality. Furthermore, an approach that neglects the specific ethical and mission-driven considerations of FADMINA, such as focusing only on financial risks without addressing reputational risks tied to its Adventist identity, would be incomplete and potentially damaging. Professionals tasked with risk assessment at FADMINAS should employ a structured decision-making process. This begins with clearly defining the scope and objectives of the risk assessment, aligning them with FADMINA's strategic goals and regulatory obligations. Next, a systematic identification of risks across all operational areas is crucial, followed by a qualitative and, where appropriate, quantitative analysis of their potential impact and likelihood. The development of risk treatment plans, including mitigation, transfer, acceptance, or avoidance, should be proportionate and cost-effective. Finally, continuous monitoring, review, and reporting are essential to ensure the risk management framework remains effective and adaptable to changing circumstances. This process should always be informed by FADMINA's unique context and values. Question 12. Consider a scenario where an applicant for a FADMINA's undergraduate program has a strong personal recommendation from a respected community leader, but their entrance exam score is slightly below the minimum threshold stipulated by the FADMINA's admission guidelines. The admissions committee is tasked with conducting a risk assessment for this applicant. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines for the FADMINA's entrance exam? Option A. Suggest the applicant retake the entrance exam at a later date, regardless of the current application cycle's deadlines, to allow them a chance to meet the minimum score without a formal risk assessment of their current application. Option B. Prioritize the recommendation from the community leader, assuming their endorsement signifies a level of potential that outweighs the specific entrance exam score, and proceed with admission. Option C. Focus solely on the entrance exam score, and if it falls below the minimum, automatically reject the application without considering other aspects of the applicant's profile. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the applicant's entire academic record and extracurricular achievements to identify any mitigating factors or exceptional strengths that might justify an exception to the minimum score requirement, while strictly adhering to any established FADMINA's policies for handling borderline cases. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the applicant's entire academic record and extracurricular achievements to identify any mitigating factors or exceptional strengths that might justify an exception to the minimum score requirement, while strictly adhering to any established FADMINAS policies for handling borderline cases. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the need to maintain academic integrity and the pressure to admit a student who may not meet the established criteria. The FADMINAS entrance exam's regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines are paramount in ensuring a fair and equitable admission process. A rigorous risk assessment is crucial to identify potential biases, ensure compliance with admission policies, and uphold the institution's reputation. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of the candidate's application against all established FADMINAS admission criteria, including academic performance, entrance exam scores, and any other stipulated requirements. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the principles of fairness, transparency, and meritocracy mandated by the FADMINAS regulatory framework. It ensures that all candidates are evaluated on the same objective standards, preventing arbitrary decisions and upholding the integrity of the admission process. This aligns with the ethical obligation to treat all applicants equitably and to maintain the academic standards of the institution. An incorrect approach that prioritizes personal connections or perceived potential over documented qualifications fails to comply with the FADMINAS admission regulations. This constitutes a regulatory failure as it bypasses the established objective criteria. Ethically, it is a failure of impartiality and fairness, potentially leading to the admission of less qualified students and undermining the trust placed in the admission committee. Another incorrect approach that involves manipulating or selectively interpreting data to justify admission, even if the candidate is borderline, represents a significant ethical breach and a potential regulatory violation. This undermines the integrity of the risk assessment process and the entire admission system. It demonstrates a lack of professional integrity and a disregard for the established guidelines. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a systematic review of all application materials, a clear understanding of the FADMINAS admission policies, and an objective evaluation of the candidate's fit based on these criteria. When faced with ambiguity or pressure, professionals should consult relevant guidelines, seek clarification from superiors if necessary, and document their decision-making process meticulously. The focus must always remain on adhering to the established regulatory framework and ethical principles of fairness and academic excellence. Question 13. Strategic planning requires a thorough understanding of potential challenges. When developing the FADMINAS entrance exam, which approach to risk assessment best ensures the integrity and fairness of the selection process? Option A. Relying on the personal experiences and intuitions of the exam committee members to gauge potential risks. Option B. Prioritizing the reduction of examination costs above all other considerations, assuming that cost savings inherently improve the process. Option C. Focusing exclusively on the logistical challenges of administering the exam, without considering the impact on candidate assessment. Option D. Systematically identifying potential threats to the exam's fairness and validity and developing proactive mitigation strategies. The correct answer is D. Systematically identifying potential threats to the exam's fairness and validity and developing proactive mitigation strategies. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because the FADMINAS entrance exam committee must balance the need for rigorous academic assessment with the ethical imperative to ensure fairness and transparency in the selection process. Misinterpreting or misapplying risk assessment principles could lead to biased outcomes, undermining the credibility of the exam and potentially disadvantaging deserving candidates. Careful judgment is required to identify and mitigate potential risks to the integrity of the examination. The correct approach involves proactively identifying potential risks to the fairness and validity of the FADMINAS entrance exam and developing strategies to mitigate them. This aligns with the principles of good governance and ethical conduct expected in educational institutions. Specifically, it requires a systematic process of risk identification, analysis, and response planning. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining the reputation of FADMINAS and ensuring that the entrance exam serves its intended purpose of selecting qualified students based on merit, in accordance with the guidelines and regulations governing higher education admissions in Brazil. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the cost-effectiveness of the examination process, without adequately considering the impact on fairness and validity, would be professionally unacceptable. This failure to prioritize fairness and validity could lead to the selection of unqualified candidates or the exclusion of qualified ones, violating the ethical obligation to provide equal opportunity. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or personal biases when assessing risks would also be professionally unacceptable. This subjective method lacks the rigor required for a fair and objective assessment and can introduce unfairness, contravening the principles of impartiality and evidence-based decision-making. A further incorrect approach that neglects to involve relevant stakeholders, such as faculty and admissions officers, in the risk assessment process would be professionally unsound. This oversight can lead to incomplete risk identification and the development of ineffective mitigation strategies, as it fails to leverage the diverse expertise and perspectives necessary for a comprehensive risk assessment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk management framework. This framework typically includes 1. Establishing the context, understanding the goals and constraints of the exam. 2. Risk identification, brainstorming potential risks. 3. Risk analysis, assessing the likelihood and impact of identified risks. 4. Risk evaluation, prioritizing risks. 5. Risk treatment, developing and implementing mitigation strategies. And 6. Monitoring and review, continuously assessing the effectiveness of the strategies. This systematic process ensures that all relevant factors are considered and that decisions are based on a thorough understanding of potential risks and their implications. Question 14. The investigation demonstrates that a candidate for the FADMINAS entrance exam may have provided inaccurate information regarding their prior academic performance on their application. The admissions committee is aware of this potential discrepancy and must decide how to proceed. Which of the following risk assessment approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework and ethical guidelines for FADMINAS? Option A. Initiate a formal verification process to confirm the accuracy of the candidate's academic records, and if a discrepancy is found, follow FADMINA's established procedures for addressing such issues, which may include further investigation or a review by an academic integrity committee. Option B. Contact the candidate directly and ask them to explain the potential discrepancy without initiating a formal investigation, making a decision based solely on their verbal response. Option C. Admit the candidate to the program while internally noting the potential misrepresentation, assuming the candidate's overall profile is strong enough to compensate. Option D. Immediately reject the candidate's application based on the suspicion of misrepresentation to maintain the integrity of the admissions process. The correct answer is A. Initiate a formal verification process to confirm the accuracy of the candidate's academic records, and if a discrepancy is found, follow FADMINA's established procedures for addressing such issues, which may include further investigation or a review by an academic integrity committee. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the need to maintain academic integrity and the pressure to admit a qualified candidate who may have misrepresented information. The FADMINA's entrance exam, like any educational institution's admissions process, operates under strict guidelines to ensure fairness and the validity of its student body. A risk assessment approach is crucial here to systematically evaluate the potential consequences of different actions and to align decisions with FADMINA's regulatory framework and ethical commitments. The correct approach involves a thorough and impartial investigation into the alleged misrepresentation. This aligns with the principles of due process and academic integrity, which are fundamental to educational institutions. Specifically, FADMINA's internal regulations and general principles of educational administration would mandate a process that allows for verification of submitted information and a fair hearing for the applicant if discrepancies are found. This approach minimizes the risk of admitting unqualified students, upholds the reputation of FADMINAS, and ensures that all applicants are evaluated on a level playing field, adhering to the spirit of the entrance examination. An incorrect approach that involves immediate rejection without verification fails to uphold due process, risks penalizing an applicant based on an unsubstantiated claim, potentially leading to an unfair outcome and reputational damage for FADMINAS if the claim proves false. Another incorrect approach, which is to admit the candidate while overlooking the potential misrepresentation, compromises academic standards and the integrity of the admissions process. This could set a precedent for future applicants to bypass honest reporting, undermining the credibility of FADMINAS. Finally, an approach that involves confronting the applicant without a clear investigative process or a defined procedure for addressing such issues lacks structure and could lead to arbitrary decisions, violating principles of fairness and transparency expected in educational admissions. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a structured risk assessment framework. This involves identifying the potential risks, e.g., admitting an unqualified student, unfair rejection, reputational damage, evaluating the likelihood and impact of each risk, and then selecting the course of action that best mitigates these risks while adhering to established regulations and ethical standards. A systematic investigation, followed by a decision based on verified facts and institutional policy, is the most robust and professionally sound method. Question 15. The analysis reveals that a candidate for admission to the Adventist colleges of Minas Gerais FADMINAS has submitted academic transcripts that show a significant improvement in grades during their final year, which appears to be a deviation from their previous performance, alongside a personal essay that articulates ambitious academic goals not fully reflected in their earlier coursework. What is the most appropriate risk assessment approach for the FADMINAS admissions committee in this situation? Option A. Conduct a deeper review by seeking clarification from the applicant regarding the academic improvement and their stated goals, potentially requesting additional evidence or an interview to assess their genuine preparedness and understanding of the program. Option B. Immediately reject the application due to the perceived inconsistency, as it suggests a potential lack of sustained academic capability. Option C. Forward the application to a specialized academic support unit for preemptive intervention, without directly addressing the applicant about the discrepancies. Option D. Proceed with admitting the student, assuming the recent academic improvement and stated goals indicate a newfound dedication and potential. Correct answer is B. Immediately reject the application due to the perceived inconsistency, as it suggests a potential lack of sustained academic capability. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario where a prospective student, applying to the Adventist colleges of Minas Gerais FADMINAS, has presented academic records that appear inconsistent with their stated learning objectives and prior academic performance. This presents a professional challenge because FADMINAS, as an educational institution, has a responsibility to ensure academic integrity and to admit students who are genuinely prepared for its programs. Misrepresenting academic history or potential can lead to a poor fit for the student, potentially impacting their academic success and the overall academic environment of the college. Careful judgment is required to balance the institution's commitment to admitting diverse students with its obligation to maintain academic standards and provide appropriate educational pathways. The correct approach involves a thorough, multifaceted risk assessment that goes beyond the surface-level presentation of academic documents. This includes seeking clarification directly from the applicant regarding any discrepancies, potentially requesting additional supporting documentation, or a personal interview to gauge their understanding and commitment. This approach aligns with FADMINA's ethical obligation to ensure fair and transparent admissions processes, upholding academic integrity by verifying the information provided. It also reflects a commitment to student success by attempting to understand the applicant's true academic standing and potential before admission. An incorrect approach would be to immediately reject the application based solely on the initial perceived inconsistencies, without further investigation. This fails to uphold the principle of providing an applicant with an opportunity to explain or clarify discrepancies, potentially leading to an unfair rejection. Another incorrect approach would be to admit the student without addressing the inconsistencies, thereby compromising academic integrity and potentially setting the student up for failure due to a mismatch in academic preparedness. A third incorrect approach would be to accept the application at face value and assume the applicant's stated objectives are fully supported by their presented academic history, ignoring the warning signs of potential misrepresentation. This neglects the due diligence expected in an admissions process. Professionals in admissions should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a balanced approach. This involves 1. Initial assessment, reviewing all submitted materials for completeness and apparent consistency. 2. Risk identification, flagging any discrepancies or areas of concern that warrant further scrutiny. 3. Information gathering, actively seeking clarification from the applicant or requesting additional evidence. 4. Evaluation, weighing the gathered information against the institution's admission criteria and academic standards. 5. Decision, making a reasoned decision based on a comprehensive understanding of the applicant's profile and potential fit, always prioritizing fairness and academic integrity. Question 16. The monitoring system demonstrates a slight, intermittent increase in response times for candidate login attempts during the initial hour of the FADMINAS entrance exam. Option A. Initiate a full system audit and cross-reference login data with network traffic logs to identify the specific cause of the latency before considering any candidate-facing actions. Option B. Alert the examination board that there is definitive evidence of external interference attempting to disrupt the exam. Option C. Immediately suspend all candidate logins and inform applicants of a potential system-wide issue to prevent further access. Option D. Assume the latency is a minor technical glitch and continue monitoring without further investigation, as it is within acceptable operational variance. The correct answer is A. Initiate a full system audit and cross-reference login data with network traffic logs to identify the specific cause of the latency before considering any candidate-facing actions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to interpret data from a monitoring system and make a judgment about potential risks, specifically in the context of an educational institution's entrance exam. The challenge lies in distinguishing between normal operational fluctuations and indicators of a more serious issue that could compromise the integrity of the exam process. Careful judgment is required to avoid overreacting to minor deviations, while also ensuring that significant risks are identified and addressed promptly, adhering to the principles of fairness and academic integrity expected by FADMINAS. The correct approach involves a systematic and evidence-based assessment of the monitoring system's output. This means not jumping to conclusions, but rather analyzing the patterns, frequency, and potential impact of any anomalies. The regulatory framework for FADMINAS entrance exams, while not explicitly detailed here, would implicitly require adherence to principles of fairness, transparency, and the prevention of academic misconduct. Therefore, a response that seeks to understand the root cause of any observed deviations before taking action aligns with these implicit requirements. This approach prioritizes data integrity and due process, ensuring that any interventions are proportionate and justified. An incorrect approach would be to immediately assume the worst-case scenario without further investigation. For instance, if the monitoring system shows a slight increase in network latency, immediately concluding that this is evidence of cheating or a system failure is premature and lacks a basis in thorough analysis. This would be an ethical failure, as it could lead to unnecessary disruption or unfair accusations. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the data altogether, assuming it is a false positive or insignificant. This would be a regulatory failure, as it neglects the responsibility to monitor and ensure the integrity of the examination process, potentially allowing genuine issues to go unaddressed. A third incorrect approach might be to implement drastic, unverified countermeasures that could negatively impact legitimate candidates, such as shutting down the system without understanding the cause of the anomaly. This would be both an ethical and potentially regulatory failure, as it compromises the candidate experience and the fairness of the exam. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with data collection and analysis. This involves understanding what the monitoring system is designed to track and what constitutes normal versus abnormal behavior. The next step is to investigate any observed anomalies, seeking to identify their cause. Based on this investigation, a risk assessment should be performed to determine the potential impact on the exam's integrity. Finally, appropriate, proportionate, and justified actions should be taken, always prioritizing fairness to the candidates and the credibility of the FADMINAS entrance exam. Question 17. To address the challenge of ensuring the long-term sustainability and integrity of the Adventist colleges of Minas Gerais FADMINAS, which approach to risk assessment would best align with the institution's operational and ethical framework? Option A. Prioritizing risk mitigation efforts solely on those that offer the most immediate and quantifiable financial returns, assuming other risks are secondary. Option B, implementing a comprehensive risk management process that systematically identifies, analyzes, and evaluates potential academic, financial, operational, and reputational risks, followed by the development of targeted mitigation strategies. Option C, relying on informal discussions among senior staff and historical anecdotes to gauge the institution's risk exposure without a structured analytical framework. Option D, focusing primarily on managing external perceptions and public relations to preemptively address any potential negative publicity, regardless of underlying operational issues. The correct answer is B, implementing a comprehensive risk management process that systematically identifies, analyzes, and evaluates potential academic, financial, operational, and reputational risks, followed by the development of targeted mitigation strategies. Explanation: the scenario presents a common challenge in educational institutions, balancing the need for robust risk assessment with the practicalities of implementation and the specific ethical and regulatory landscape of the Adventist colleges of Minas Gerais FADMINAS. The professional challenge lies in identifying and mitigating potential risks that could impact the institution's academic integrity, financial stability, and reputation, all while adhering to FADMINA's unique operational and ethical framework. A thorough risk assessment requires a systematic approach that considers both internal and external factors, ensuring that the institution remains resilient and compliant. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and systematic identification, analysis, and evaluation of risks relevant to FADMINA's operations. This includes considering academic, financial, operational, and reputational risks, and developing appropriate mitigation strategies. This approach is justified by the fundamental principles of good governance and institutional management, which mandate proactive risk management to safeguard the institution's mission and stakeholders' interests. Specifically, within the context of FADMINAS, this would align with any internal policies or guidelines that emphasize due diligence, responsible stewardship of resources, and the maintenance of a safe and ethical learning environment, consistent with Adventist values. An approach that focuses solely on immediate financial gains without considering broader institutional impacts is incorrect because it neglects crucial non-financial risks, such as reputational damage or compromised academic quality, which can have long-term detrimental effects. This fails to meet the comprehensive duty of care expected of an educational institution. An approach that prioritizes external perceptions over internal operational realities is also incorrect. While reputation is important, a risk assessment must be grounded in the actual operational environment and potential vulnerabilities within FADMINAS. Ignoring internal weaknesses in favor of superficial external appearances is a flawed strategy that leaves the institution exposed. An approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or past experiences without a structured analytical framework is incorrect. Risk assessment requires a systematic and evidence-based methodology to ensure that all significant risks are identified and appropriately prioritized. Relying on informal observations can lead to overlooking critical threats or misjudging their severity, thereby failing to implement effective mitigation measures. The professional decision-making process for similar situations involves establishing a clear risk management framework, engaging relevant stakeholders across different departments, conducting thorough due diligence, and regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment to adapt to changing circumstances. This iterative process ensures that FADMINAS can effectively anticipate, manage, and respond to potential challenges, thereby upholding its commitment to excellence and its unique institutional values. Question 18. The review process indicates that a candidate for the FADMINAS entrance examination has presented a compelling personal narrative and has strong recommendations, but their performance on a specific standardized test component falls slightly below the minimum threshold outlined in the official admission guidelines. The admissions committee is aware of the candidate's potential contributions to the college community. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure adherence to FADMINA's regulatory framework and ethical admission standards? Option A. Grant the candidate admission based on their strong narrative and recommendations, considering their potential to contribute, and document this decision as an exception to the standardized test requirement. Option B. Inform the candidate that they do not meet the minimum threshold for the standardized test and therefore cannot be admitted, without further consideration of their other qualifications. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the candidate's entire application, including academic records, extracurricular achievements, and the standardized test score, to determine if the overall profile meets the spirit of the admission criteria, while strictly adhering to any established appeals or special review procedures. Option D. Recommend a re-evaluation of the standardized test by a different examiner, with instructions to focus on aspects that might align better with the candidate's strengths to ensure a fair outcome. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the candidate's entire application, including academic records, extracurricular achievements, and the standardized test score, to determine if the overall profile meets the spirit of the admission criteria, while strictly adhering to any established appeals or special review procedures. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the need to maintain academic integrity and the pressure to admit a candidate who may not fully meet the established criteria. Careful judgment is required to balance fairness to the applicant with the integrity of the FADMINAS entrance examination process. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of the applicant's qualifications against the established FADMINAS entrance examination guidelines. This means evaluating all submitted documentation and performance metrics without bias or undue influence. The regulatory framework for university entrance exams, as established by the Ministry of Education, MEC in Brazil, mandates a transparent and merit-based selection process. Adhering to these guidelines ensures fairness, equal opportunity, and the maintenance of academic standards. Ethically, it upholds the principle of impartiality and avoids creating a precedent that could undermine the credibility of future admissions. An incorrect approach would be to bypass or significantly alter the standard assessment procedures based on external pressure or a perceived need to help the applicant. This could involve overlooking deficiencies in the application or artificially inflating scores. Such actions would violate the principles of transparency and meritocracy enshrined in Brazilian educational regulations. Ethically, it constitutes a breach of professional integrity, potentially leading to accusations of favoritism or corruption, and damaging the reputation of FADMINAS. Another incorrect approach would be to reject the applicant outright without a comprehensive review, especially if there is a possibility that mitigating circumstances or alternative qualifications, not immediately apparent, could justify admission. This would fail to uphold the principle of providing a fair opportunity for all candidates to be considered based on their merits. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve 1. Understanding and strictly adhering to the FADMINAS entrance examination regulations and relevant MEC guidelines. 2. Conducting a complete and objective evaluation of the applicant's profile against all established criteria. 3. Documenting all assessment steps and decisions meticulously. 4. Seeking guidance from senior academic administrators or the admissions committee if ambiguities or complex ethical considerations arise. 5. Prioritizing fairness, transparency, and the academic integrity of the institution above all else. Question 19. What factors determine the most appropriate demonstration of an applicant's suitability for admission to Adventist colleges of Minas Gerais FADMINAS, considering the institution's mission and ethical framework? Option A. The applicant's ability to impress the admissions committee with a charismatic personality and a broad range of extracurricular achievements, regardless of their relevance to FADMINAS. Option B. Clear articulation of how the applicant's academic goals and personal values align with FADMINAS' mission, pedagogical approach, and commitment to ethical principles. Option C. The applicant's perceived potential for future financial success and their ability to contribute to the college's endowment. Option D. The applicant's familiarity with the latest trends in higher education and their ability to articulate generic aspirations for personal growth. The correct answer is B. A clear articulation of how the applicant's academic goals and personal values align with FADMINAS' mission, pedagogical approach, and commitment to ethical principles. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to balance their personal aspirations with the institutional mission and ethical considerations of FADMINAS. The entrance exam is designed to assess not only academic readiness, but also an understanding of the values and principles that guide the institution. A careful judgment is required to identify which factors are most relevant to demonstrating this alignment. The correct approach involves recognizing that FADMINAS, as an educational institution, prioritizes academic merit, alignment with its pedagogical philosophy, and a commitment to ethical conduct. Therefore, demonstrating a clear understanding of the institution's mission, its academic programs, and its ethical framework is paramount. This aligns with the implicit regulatory expectation for educational institutions to admit students who are likely to succeed academically and contribute positively to the learning environment, adhering to principles of fairness and meritocracy. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on personal ambition, without demonstrating an understanding of FADMINA's specific context, fails to acknowledge the institution's unique identity and goals. This could lead to admitting students who may not be a good fit, potentially impacting the academic community and the institution's reputation. Another incorrect approach that emphasizes superficial aspects or external validation, rather than genuine interest and alignment with FADMINA's values, overlooks the core purpose of an entrance examination. This approach suggests a lack of serious consideration for the institution's mission and could result in a misallocation of resources and opportunities. The professional decision-making process for applicants should involve thorough research into FADMINA's mission statement, academic offerings, and any stated values or ethical guidelines. Applicants should then reflect on how their own goals and experiences align with these aspects, articulating this connection clearly in their application and any required assessments. This demonstrates a thoughtful and committed approach to seeking admission. Question 20. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual pattern of student activity during an online FADMINAS entrance exam, specifically a series of rapid cursor movements and repeated access to specific sections of the exam interface that deviate significantly from typical engagement. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for the FADMINAS Examination Oversight Committee? Option A. Initiate a formal, confidential investigation into the observed activity, gathering all system logs, and providing the student with an opportunity to explain their actions before any conclusions are drawn. Option B. Advise the student via the exam platform that their activity has been flagged as suspicious and request an immediate explanation. Option C. Immediately flag the student's exam for review and potential disqualification based on the deviation from normal activity patterns. Option D. Ignore the anomaly, assuming it is a technical artifact or an unusual but legitimate study strategy. The correct answer is A. Initiate a formal, confidential investigation into the observed activity, gathering all system logs, and providing the student with an opportunity to explain their actions before any conclusions are drawn. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a potential breach of academic integrity, presenting a professionally challenging scenario for FADMINA's administrators. The challenge lies in balancing the need to uphold academic standards and prevent misconduct with the imperative to ensure fair processes and avoid unsubstantiated accusations. Careful judgment is required to investigate the anomaly without prejudicing the student or compromising the integrity of the examination. The correct approach involves a systematic and evidence-based investigation. This entails gathering all relevant data from the monitoring system, cross-referencing it with other available information, e.g., exam instructions, student history, and then initiating a formal, confidential inquiry process as outlined by FADMINA's internal regulations on academic misconduct. This process should include providing the student with an opportunity to respond to the allegations and present their perspective. This aligns with principles of due process and fairness, ensuring that any disciplinary action is based on substantiated evidence and adheres to FADMINA's established academic policies, which are designed to maintain the credibility of its degrees and the fairness of its assessment procedures. An incorrect approach would be to immediately assume guilt and impose sanctions based solely on the initial system alert. This fails to acknowledge the possibility of technical glitches, misinterpretations of data, or innocent explanations for the observed behavior. Such an action would violate FADMINA's commitment to fair treatment and could lead to wrongful disciplinary measures, potentially damaging the student's academic record and the institution's reputation. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the alert without any further investigation, assuming it is a false positive. This neglects the responsibility to maintain academic integrity and could allow genuine instances of misconduct to go unaddressed, undermining the value of FADMINA's qualifications and creating an environment where academic dishonesty might be perceived as tolerated. A third incorrect approach would be to publicly disclose the suspected misconduct before a thorough investigation and a formal decision have been made. This constitutes a breach of confidentiality and could unfairly damage the student's reputation, violating principles of privacy and due process. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, acknowledge and document the anomaly. Second, consult FADMINA's internal policies and procedures for handling academic integrity concerns. Third, initiate a confidential and impartial investigation, gathering all necessary evidence and providing the student with a fair hearing. And finally, make a decision based on the findings and applicable FADMINA's regulations.